about waiting and being patient. And that's something which I used to call the in-between moments of life. And you find there's a lot of your time, many hours, if you add them all up, probably days and weeks, what we call the in-between moments. You're sitting down, you're waiting for the talk to happen, you're just in the queue waiting to get the food. And because I get my food delivered to teacher's cottage, I don't actually stand in the... Is it a buffet service? You have enough for breakfast and lunch? Are there two lines, like there should be in good temples? You know what the first line is for? The first line in a Buddhist temple or a retreat center is for the ordinary person. We call it self-service. For those who are enlightened, it has to be a different line. No self-service. I remember seeing articles on this. And there was also... Again, I don't know if it is still there, but I hope it is. And if it's gone, I don't know where it's gone, because it was such a lovely Buddhist cartoon. And just 3 or 4 pictures, drawings. And the first one was of this retreatant. And he was walking in to see the teacher with a big sign. And written on the sign, "I want happiness," it said on the sign. And he was very miserable and very upset. And it's like maybe everyone here. Do you come here because you want happiness? I want happiness. So how do you get that? How do you solve that problem of wanting happiness? So the teacher said, first mistake. He took his little sign and scrubbed out the I. That's the first mistake, I. So the sign then said, want happiness. He was still miserable. So the teacher got out a little pen and scrubbed out the want. And the sign only said happiness. There, that's the solution. And I thought that was a little brilliant cartoon. It's the I want is the problem. And to make that really clear, and somebody was just asking me about, what is enlightenment, and I'll go back to the meditation afterwards. But, what is enlightenment? And you find that so many people will have so many different ideas, and they can't all be right. And in fact, quite often people say some crazy things, thinking that's enlightenment. I remember one of the Buddhist magazines, Inquiring Mind, in the United States. They said they're doing a whole magazine on enlightenment, and could I send in a contribution? Because I was a well-known Buddhist monk. And so the contribution only took me about 20 minutes to write on the computer, because it was fun. I always notice when I have to be serious, it always takes much longer. And my article was titled, "Who Wants to Become Enlightened?" And apparently, because I don't watch TV, it was based on a quiz show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? But this was more important, Who Wants to Be Enlightened? And so I had different contestants. One was, if I remember it correctly, was Miss Anna Gami, representing Theravada. One was Amy Taba, representing Mahayana. I forget who the other names were. And the way to find out the winner of the competition, who wants to be enlightened, first of all, I mentioned the prize. The prize was a solid gold meditation cushion. Delightful to look at, but hell to sit on. And I was making some points there. Do we really want comfort, or do we really want what impresses other people? And then they had these different contests. And I think for the last two, there was a Zen monk and a psychologist. They were in the last two. And you had to show a psychic power. And so the Zen monk meditated deeply. He rose up into the air, and the live audience, they were just so impressed. Actually, you see somebody levitating. So they all clapped and cheered. And the poor Zen monk was disturbed from his concentration by all the clapping, and he fell to the ground and killed himself. It was all, it's typical Ajahn Brahm stupid jokes. And eventually the psychologist and psychotherapist, won because she was the only one found wanting. It was just a satire on how people want to become enlightened or think they know what enlightenment is. And I sent it really quickly. I was just having fun, enjoying myself. And I sent it to these people and I said, look, I know you're going to reject this. It's not what you really want. But I'm sending it anyway. I'll send a proper article sort of this afternoon sometime. And I got the email straight back, no, we like this. Thank you. Can we publish it? So that's my article. But never think that humor is not profound. Sometimes the most deepest teachings can be conveyed by a story which everyone can understand. I do realize, because I remember this when I was a lay Buddhist myself, sometimes we would go to these lectures at university on Buddhism. And I was at Cambridge, there's some really sort of big brains there. Small minds, but big brains. Sorry. But look, quite frankly, there's some truth in that. Because, I was a Buddhist at university. I didn't really know too many other Buddhists. And so I had a few friends from different religions. I thought that was good to be able to hang out, not just with other Buddhists, which was probably just myself, but also with people from different religions. We had some great arguments, not with any ill will. In those days, you could have an argument with a person, and just at the end of the argument, whoever won the argument had to, pay for the dinner or something that evening. So it was all just keeping your friendship very strong. So one of my friends, he was a Christian, and he said that he was going to the local, it was like a hospital for those who had mental impairments. They were going to volunteer, because that's what the Christians are very strong on. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's embarrassing me. And they knew I was a Buddhist, and said, can I go along as well as a Buddhist? I didn't want to go. I was just flying the flag of Buddhism. We Buddhists are as good as you Christians. That's all it was, just pride. But I went there, and where we were volunteering was in a occupational therapy unit for those with Down's syndrome. And you went there in the afternoon and just hung out, supported those with the Down syndrome, did little tasks together. And the two Christians who went with me, they dropped out after a couple of weeks. And I kept going for 2 years. And I kept going there, not because I had to. It wasn't because I was a Buddhist and trying to show off. I went on going there because I enjoyed that so much. And I learned so much as well. How, first of all, not to judge people, because I was stunned by what we now call emotional intelligence of those people who had Down syndrome. And to give an example, something I will never forget, when I went there in the afternoon, it's the Fulbourn Hospital just outside of Cambridge. I went there in the afternoon as I was walking from the bus, into the unit. Just one of the Down syndrome men saw me and rushed towards me and ran and gave me a big hug. I said, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "There's something wrong, isn't there?" They saw it straight away, that the night before I'd broken up with a girlfriend. No one else could see that, but this Down syndrome man had seen straight away that I was suffering and spotted it and just came up and gave a big hug to me. And I always remember that. His emotional intelligence was huge. Sometimes they didn't know how to string a sentence together. Sometimes they weren't capable of passing exams or anything like that. But there was still something inside of them which all those people in Cambridge could not see. He could see straight through me. I was a stupid one. And to emphasize that, after a couple of years there, that they trusted me so much in the unit, I've been going there for such a long time, that they asked me to take one group in the first part of the afternoon. Because it was England, they always had tea in the afternoon, a little break for a cup of tea. I always thought that was a very wonderful thing about English culture. When you break for a cup of tea in the afternoon, you have a rest, even at work, no matter what work you're doing. And that allows you to relax your brain and get your energy back and see things fresh, after the tea break. If you can't have a tea break, have a meditation break. Just a break between all that heavy work that you do. And don't ever think that you're losing out, you're wasting time. Because a few minutes break in meditation, you make time. You're more efficient after having a rest. But anyway, back to the Down syndrome unit. I went into this first group, the first session, had a cup of tea, went to the second group, just by myself, because I could look after them without any help. And they totally deceived me. Because after the second group time was finished, the head of the departments with the other sort of occupational trainees, trainee managers, whatever you might call them, they said, "Oh, can you come into the other room again?" When I went into the other room, all these Down syndrome people, they'd all got together, and they all had presents for me. They'd been making them that afternoon, and I hadn't suspected a thing. And these beautiful little cards and other little gifts. And they said that you've been coming here longer than anybody else they could remember, volunteering. And they wanted to show their appreciation because the final exams were starting, they said, next week. So can I accept all these things? They realized, they said, it's my last day. But what happened after accepting all those beautiful gifts, which meant a lot to me, then afterwards I humbly said, actually, my final exams don't start for another 10 days. Can I please come next week as well? And I wanted to come. I got so much joy and happiness and understanding by going to that group every Thursday afternoon. And it really showed me just how, if you can extend, your circle and investigate places which you think you're helping others, but you find out, you're the one who's being helped. And if ever you think or you assess that I've got some emotional intelligence, that I can understand some of you, it is because of the training which I got at university. In the unit looking after Down syndrome people. They taught me so much. And it's how you can have that kindness a non-judgmental and a non-discriminatory attitude towards those who are different than you are. And that becomes not something you're supposed to do, it just becomes natural to your character. And it's one of the reasons why that when you started, there was a call I got when I first came to Perth, and it was the gentleman who was calling said, "I'm in Bunbury high security prison." And he said, "I'm a prisoner." And first of all he said, "You wouldn't believe how many months it's taken to make this call, all the permissions I needed." And he said, "We want to invite one of you monks to come and teach meditation at the prison." And sometimes you can tell if a person is being honest or they're trying to deceive you. And my impression, this fellow was so honest. He was really trying hard to get a monk to teach meditation in prison. So I immediately accepted, even though it was a long way, and I didn't know how it would turn out. But, eventually, first of all, when I started the story, I got to tell some of the important parts of the story. I went down there, and it's usually an evening session. And the first session I went to teach meditation at Bunbury Prison, about 100 people turned out, more than you people here, about 100. And they said that's almost the whole, they call it muster, the whole prisoner population in that jail. There's only about 4 or 5 didn't go, and that's because they were sick or they were in some other sorts of problems. But almost everyone, when I saw that, this hall packed with prisoners all wanting to learn meditation, of course I was impressed and inspired, and I really wanted to do the best for them. And I started teaching them meditation. Only after about 3 or 4 minutes, they were very impatient, and one of the men put his hand up and said, "Can I ask a question?" I later found that this man was one of the leaders of the gangs in the prison. He actually became a very good friend over the years. I remember him very much. And he was the one who later on told me that he said, you don't have to worry at all about your security inside these prisons. We all know you and we respect you a lot. And if anybody tried to rape you, and the men were targets for rape inside these prisons, some of the prisoners had nothing to lose. They're going to be there for such a long time. He said, if anybody tried that, a few of us in the front would get to them first of all. And I knew he meant that. He was a very big guy, and he was incredibly friendly towards me. So I always felt safe in there. But at this prison, he was the one who asked the first question about meditation. He was asking it on behalf of most of the prisoners who'd come to the class. And it was, is it true that through meditation you can learn how to fly over walls? It was a prison. I wanted to know. I'm not making this up. That's what he said. Is it true you can fly over walls when you meditate? And I had to be honest. And levitation is incredibly rare, but it does happen sometimes. But only very, very rarely. It's not an easy thing to teach you. And so we accepted that. And the next week when I went, only about 3 people turned up to my class. That's what they wanted. They wanted an easy way to escape. Imagine just sit down there and just fly over walls. Anyway, the reason I told that story was I got one of the best, and please excuse me, I'm not trying to praise myself, but just praise what happens when you meditate, when you get the emotional intelligence, as well as just the nice deep meditations. got one of the best compliments which I've ever had. And that was from a prison officer, one of the big prisons here in Perth. And he said, can you please come back to my prison to teach? That was the old, they used to call it Canning Vale Jail. They always give them new names. I forget what it's called now, Acacia or something. But anyway, he said, can you come back to teach at my jail? He said, I'm about to retire and I want you to come back. And I said, look, I'm an abbot now. I've got to go traveling to Singapore to teach retreats and to Malaysia and other places. We've got lots of other monasteries to look after. I've got to go to England to make sure that Venerable Chanda is well looked after. Is that true? Yeah. And so I said, I'll send somebody else. He said, no, I want you. And of course, what happens next is say, why me? He said, I'm not a Buddhist, but I've noticed, he said, in all the years I've worked in this prison, that everybody who goes to your class, when they're released, never comes back. I don't know what you've been doing, but I want you to do more of it. Please come back. And again, that was just a compliment which really went to my heart. You know, I don't get much pay in this job, but I get a lot of job satisfaction. And so I asked him, well, you know, why me? And he said, that's why. And of course, afterwards, I tried to explore why. Why is it when you can go into a jail, talk to prisoners, and some really rough prisoners, why is it that you can talk to them and they never go back again? And even some of these little stories, which I'm sure you all know about, 2 bad bricks in the wall. There's one prisoner over in, I think they may probably been released now. He was in there for murder, convicted of murdering somebody. And usually at the end of the sentence, or when they're pretty safe, they can go and stay in Karna Prison Farm up the road here. And apparently the other monks who go up there were saying, he read that book and was very impressed with the story about the 2 bad bricks. Just because there's 2 crooked bricks, it doesn't mean it's a bad wall. He was going around saying, it was only 2 murders. It was only 2 murders. But that worked for him. He didn't think he was a murderer. He'd just done 2 murders. There's a different thing about being a criminal and someone who's done a crime. It's like a thief is someone who always has to be a thief. They're branded for life. You're a thief. No, sometimes people steal. I don't know why they do that. A lot of time here in Australia because of drugs. They don't know really what they're up to. And you give them a bit of confidence and respect, and after a while, when they get released, they never do it again. And it was just giving people respect. That was what was important. And just like with mental health, I'll go back to enlightenment in a minute. Please excuse me. Like even with mental health, I always recall being asked to give a presentation at a mental health week, they called it, here in Western Australia. I was in the convention centre, and I'm always happy to help, and they wanted me to do a presentation to what they call here the clients of mental health. Not the doctors, psychologists, carers or whatever, but to the people who were being helped and cared for. And when I went in there, many of these had never seen a Buddhist monk before. And so after the talk, a couple of them came out and said, we come first of all to thank you and to apologize to you. And I said, why apologize? And please excuse my language. Those of you who know English will understand this, know English. They said, when you came in to give a talk and you went on that stage, we thought, who the hell is this wanker? Meaning me. It's a very nasty thing to say in England about someone you don't respect. And I hadn't heard that word for years. When I was in England, I could hear that word, and I thought, that's really funny. And he said, we apologise, we didn't know who you were, we thought you were one of these other professor types who's going to tell us what the theories are. He said, you came up there on that stage and you made us cry and laugh, almost at the same time. And the story which really hit them was the old story, which I'm sure many of you have heard before, but these great stories, please know that I've heard this story more than you have. Every time I tell it. And I don't mind at all, because it inspires me, it's true. And I said that I'm a forest monk. I live in forests, here in Australia and in other parts of the world. I grew up in the forest, the jungles of Thailand. And I've noticed something, that in the forests, even this forest, there's no such thing as a perfectly straight tree. Every tree in this forest is bent, twisted, crooked. It's had many of the branches torn off by the winds. The bark is scarred by the bushfires, which is part of nature here in Australia. And all the leaves in the trees, they're not all green, some are brown, some are being eaten by the little animals, whatever it is, which live in the forests here. They're all imperfect. And many are damaged. So I said, I've never seen a perfect tree in the forest. I've only seen damaged, crooked trees. And that's the truth. You go and have a walk and see if you can find a perfect tree. They're all bent, damaged. So I said, if you are damaged by life, by some mental illness or physical illness, or you've had some trauma, please know that you belong. You're part of the forest called humanity. You're not excluded. And number two, if you're really bent and really damaged and extremely crooked, you are one of the most beautiful trees in that forest. Because that's true. In these forests, I really like the crooked trees, the ones which are bent, which one which the branches are all over the place. They're the ones which are truly beautiful. And so straight away, they realized they didn't need to hide. They weren't excluded. They were part of nature. And sometimes some of the most beautiful parts of nature. So that made us cry and laugh. People always wanted to cure us and make us fit into some sort of ideal. They always thought there was something wrong with us. We started to believe that ourselves, that there's something wrong with us. I say, no. Please stay as you are. You're part of life. Thank you for being who you are. And of course, that type of acceptance was also what I gave to the prisoners in jail. It's what I give to you. Some of you are great meditators. Some of you are hopeless meditators. I've been teaching you for years. I just wonder why I keep doing it. It doesn't matter. So anyway, I did promise to talk about enlightenment, to keep my precepts and not lying. So, first of all, people have weird ideas of what enlightenment is. And again, you can describe things, but when you describe something which is so distant from somebody, they can't really get their heads around it, you're wasting your breath. So instead, there was this wonderful story. I did write published a story in one of the books, and it's a very impressive story because it says many of the things about the different people in life and why you do things. And it was a story of the 5 children playing the wishing game. And the rules of the wishing game are you all have a wish each, and the one who comes up with the best wish wins the game. So the first kid, and always remember, any game, don't be the first. Because afterwards, you can learn. It's the old story of the monk, the priest, and the Jewish rabbi, who would meet regularly to get some interfaith harmony. And they started by just they couldn't have dinner together because the monk can't eat in the evening. So they had lunch, but that was really hard because the monk has to eat before noon. So then they started trying something else. They started having some games they were going to play just to get to know each other. And that was also difficult. So they started playing cards together, which was very easy. Just in somebody's room, it's easy to play cards. To make it more interesting, they made it poker and just put a few coins on to bet. And I thought that would actually give them something they're struggling for, and they could get some understanding of each other. But in the place they were doing that, it was illegal to gamble. So someone told the police, and these 3 religious leaders were arrested and had to go into court on trial. The Jewish rabbi, the Christian priest, and the Buddhist monk. And I said, never be the first. So the first person was asked was the Christian priest. And he said, no, Reverend Sir, were you gambling? No, you're a priest, so I can't accept that you're going to lie to me, so please, just say it truthfully, yes or no, were you gambling? And really quickly, the priest looked up into the sky and muttered, please Jesus forgive me, and said, no, I wasn't gambling. He looked up in the sky so quickly that no one noticed that. That was his trick. Okay, you can go. Then they asked the Jewish rabbi, were you gambling? And he did an old trick I remember I learned at school. I hope you don't know it in Singapore. I'm sure you do. He put his hands behind his back and crossed his fingers. Do you have that in Singapore? You cross your fingers and then it's like a lie, but you can't admit it? You do that? Yeah. Okay. You do that. Okay, be careful. Yeah. Yeah, when the kids, yeah. But that's what he did. And so, okay, not gambling, you can go. And then last one was the monk. And so the monk realized he can't look up into heaven and say, Jesus, forgive me. And the judge was getting a bit suspicious, said, please keep your hands in front of you so I can see them. So, Venerable monk, were you gambling? And he responded honestly, with whom? Okay, so he got off too. But anyway, the 5 monks playing the wishing game. I will get around to it sooner or later. So, not monks, so the kids playing the wishing game. So the first kid, if you had a wish, what would it be? And so his wish was for the latest computer game. Now, usually I would ask someone before I tell this story, what's the latest computer game? I haven't got a clue. I don't know what real computer games are, because they didn't have those things when I was a kid. The latest computer game. Okay, good wish. The second kid, if you had a wish, what would it be? And because the second kid had heard the first kid, he could actually think and clearly get a much better wish than the latest computer game. He said, if I had a wish, I would wish for my own computer game shop. Because if I owned it, I can always get the latest computer game, the next computer game when it comes out. So owning the shop which sells computer games is much, much better. So then they asked the third kid. And this girl said, if I had a wish, now she was much smarter than the first two boys. If I had a wish, I would wish for $10 billion US. It's a lot of money. And the first thing I would buy is my own computer game shop. But that wouldn't cost 10 billion. And then this is US dollars, it's not Indonesian rupiah. And then with my second wish, no, not my second wish, sorry. First, $10 billion US, having got my own computer game shop, the next thing which I would buy is my own school. Because the problem is, even if I have free computer games, my mummy won't let me play with it until I've done my homework. And if I own the school and pay the principal and all the staff, I can soon arrange to have no homework and still get top marks in the school every year. And once I graduate from my own school, then I can buy my own university, which I think is what Mr. Trump did, isn't it? Trump University? I don't know. Anyway. And I buy my own university and I can give myself an honorary degree, and that will make my mummy happy, and I can spend all day and night playing computer games. And with $10 billion, anything else which I need, whenever I need it, I'll have plenty of money to buy it. Beat that wish. That's a pretty big wish, a fortune. And the fourth child said, I can beat that very easily. If I had a wish, I would wish for 3 wishes. That's a wish. And with my first wish, I'll have the computer game shop. My second wish, I'll have $10 billion US. And for my third wish, I'll have 3 more wishes. That way I can go on forever. Beat that. Infinity of wishes. And the fourth kid easily beat that. And the fourth kid said, fifth kid, yeah, okay, I can't count. The fifth kid said, if I had a wish, I wish I was so content I never needed any more wishes ever again. And they all agreed that he won the wishing game. That was the Buddha explaining what enlightenment is. So content you don't need any more wishes. The end of desire and craving and wanting. The fourth kid, infinity of wishes, that's called power. When you're the dictator of the local country, or you're the spiritual director of the Buddhist Society. You can get whatever you want just by saying it. Sometimes people think that that is happiness. It's not. There's no end to things you might want. That's called the myth of power. It explains why I've seen so many times very wealthy people who don't need to work again in their lives. They decide to become presidents or prime ministers of their country. Why do you want to do that? You can relax and be at ease forever with all the money you have. They want to do that to try and attain the infinity of wishes granted with power. It's much more, we might call attractive than just wealth. The best person of all is that person who is so at ease, so at peace, you never need any more wishes ever again. That's what enlightenment is. The end of desire. Freedom. I thought that was a very wonderful description. It's very close. If anyone thinks we just make these things up, it doesn't refer to what the Buddha said. This was actually Sariputta's description of what is enlightenment. The end of wanting, the end of ill will, the end of delusion. All those things going. And that's where actually you can find out who's enlightened and who's not enlightened. There was once, you may know this story also, the story of this monk in China a long time ago, who he'd done his basic training in a monastery, and he asked the teacher, there's a little island, uninhabited, only a small one, in the middle of a lake, not far from this monastery. Can I please go there? I build a nice little kuti for myself there. And because it was, and what I would like to do is if you can send over just once a week, just simple food that I can eat, and just for once a week, and anything else which I happen to need, with an attendant, and leave me there alone to meditate. And the head of the monastery, the abbot, said, well, that's a reasonable request. So it was arranged. The monk went over there, built himself a very simple hut very quickly, and an attendant, a monastery attendant, would row over to the island once a week with some food, very simple food, some rice, some beans or whatever, and anything else which he needed. And that's the way he lived there, almost in perfect solitude, for about 3 years. And after 3 years of living and meditating so much, this monk thought he was enlightened. So now what should he do? So when the attendant came the next time, the monk asked him, can you please, next time you come over in 1 week, send over a quill, some ink, and a parchment. I want to write some calligraphy. So 1 week later, when the attendant arrived, he had to scroll a fine parchment, some ink, and a quill pen. And then the monk meditated very deeply, and after a particularly deep meditation, he wrote this poem in 4 lines. The diligent monk, alone for 3 years, is no longer moved by the 4 worldly winds. And it's even one of the chants which we do in the Ratana Sutta, is where they say, just like a post firmly planted in the ground, is no longer shaken by the winds. It's a simile which has been used often, even in Theravada, of enlightenment. So it's his claim to be enlightened. And having written it, he rolled it up, put a little ribbon around it, and when the attendant came the week later, he gave it to the attendant and said, please deliver this to the abbot, the head monk of the monastery. And then he relaxed and rested, knowing that the abbot of the monastery would now recognize he had an enlightened monk on the island. When the attendant monk came back 1 week later, he had a scroll, looked just like his scroll. He said, this is from the abbot. And so the monk, really excited, opened up the scroll, and so it was his scroll. It was his original graffiti, but now, across the first line, the diligent monk, the abbot had written in red ink, fart. F-A-R-T, fart. Alone for 3 years. He'd written on there, fart in capital letters. And on the third line, is no longer moved. He'd written fart in capital letters underlined by the four worldly winds. And this time a big F-A-R-T underlined with 3 exclamation marks after it. And that was on his calligraphy, which took him 3 years to get the depth of meditation to be able to write. And this monk was so upset and angry. That stupid abbot has spoiled the calligraphy of someone who's just been enlightened. That calligraphy, that scroll should have been put up in some museum somewhere. And he's ruined it, the stupid abbot. So he ran to the shore and he managed to call the attendant, "Come over quick, I need to go and see that abbot." And so the attendant rowed him over the lake and went to the monastery to see the abbot. And this monk slammed the scroll of paper on the desk in front of the abbot and he said, "What have you done to this, my claim of enlightenment?" And then the abbot slowly stood up, opened up the scroll and read out the poem which the monk had written. "The diligent monk, alone for 3 years, is no longer moved by the 4 worldly winds. Yet," said the monk, the abbot, "4 little farts have blown you clean across the lake." It's a gross story, but it worked. It taught that monk he wasn't enlightened. So he had to row over to the hermitage and carry on meditating. So that is usually the way if anybody claims to be enlightened. We usually abuse them or something. I mean, not sort of physically. No, if Venerable Chandra came up and said, "I'm fully enlightened after this retreat," I would say, "Oh, look, women can't become enlightened. It's impossible." That's not true, of course. It's just that I'm saying that to try and upset her. She said, "What? I believed in you and taken refuge in this for so many years." And if she just smiles and says, "Yeah, okay," whatever you say, then I think maybe it's true. So that's actually how we find out. But just to finish off this talk, I'm sure many of you know the story. You know the time when I became enlightened? Do you want to hear that story? Again. Because sometimes people ask me, "Are you enlightened, Ajahn Brahm?" I'll tell you the time when I became enlightened. I thought. It was my 4th year as a monk. And I was in this forest monastery, actually basically in the middle of nowhere. And it was an ordinary monastery. But the abbot there, the teacher, he was amazing because one of the things I noticed with him, I've never seen this with anybody else, I never do this. Sometimes he would start giving a talk and then he would fall asleep. Then suddenly you wake up, and then he'd carry on the talk, from he finished half a sentence before he fell asleep, and then he fell asleep, and the rest of the sentence would be completed when he came up again. It was just like he didn't know that he was unconscious for a while. But that was difficult for us because we never knew when he was going to wake up. So we had to stay there. But anyway, so it was a range retreat and didn't have many duties, really getting into some nice meditation. And on the moon nights, was it a moon night? No, it couldn't have been because sometimes it would rain. But anyway, I had lots of good energy. So I was meditating, sitting down and walking and sitting down and walking. And sometimes, you can really get, your meditation really hot. It's really beautiful meditation. It gets easier and easier and easier, more and more bliss, more and more depth. And it was after a nice deep meditation, I was on the walking meditation path. It must have been about 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock or something. And then as I was walking, all these incredible insights came. I didn't look for them, they were just pouring in until the big one came. The insight into everything. Oh, that was amazing. And as I was walking there, just so much energy was up in my mind. And I realized there was another enlightened being in Thailand. And I went to the hall just to sit. No sloth and torpor at all, no restlessness, a perfectly poised mind, so much bliss. It was all so easy. And then I thought that, I should have some rest. So I went up to my heart, not to sleep, just to stretch my back. And then, there's no way I'm going to go to sleep with so much energy and clarity in my mind. So I almost got up after 5 or 10 minutes and went to the hall. The bell usually went for the morning meeting at 3 a.m. I was already sitting there by 3 a.m. And many of those mornings, it was in the jungles. I was sleep deprived, of course, but I had so much energy. I was sitting there, no sloth and torpor at all. It was just so easy to meditate. And even when we did our morning chanting, things like Yoso. I never chanted Yoso. Yoso Bhagawa! I had so much energy. I couldn't stop that. And then after the chanting, we got ready to go on alms round. And as I was going on alms round in the village, wow, I was zapping every person who gave some rice into my bowl. And I was thinking, you don't know how lucky you are. This morning, you're giving rice to a newly enlightened Western monk. And I was just full of bliss. And when we finally, after the alms round, got to the monastery, there was something else which actually for the whole range routine, I never saw again. That someone had bought, usually we had just one pot of curry to go with the rice. This day there were 2 pots. And the usual pot of curry we had every day was the rotten fish curry. To explain what it is, they would catch the fish in the paddy fields the year before, they would put it in earthen jars, a bit of plastic on top, and leave it there to go rotten. They like the smell. Just sometimes we do that. Blue cheese, kimchi or something, I don't know, but anyway, fish which people have, the more rotten and smelly it is, the more they like it. So anyway, that was the rotten fish curry every day. But this curry in the other pot was a pork curry. It was something which you would call edible. I thought, where's that come from? And then I concluded, the heavenly beings have noticed as the new enlightened one, and so they've also come to celebrate. And when I sat there in the line, I had my rice and was waiting for the curry to be passed down. I was the number 2 monk, so the head monk had his share first of all. There's no exaggeration. He was a local boy. He was actually born in that village. He grew up on rotten fish curry. I thought he liked it. But then he took this ladle and this whopping big spoons of pork curry into his bowl. No one could eat that much. Now 3 big spoon loads into his bowl. I didn't mind, because there's plenty left for the newly enlightened monk. But what he did next was just incredible. It was unbelievable. Having taken his own, he never took any rotten fish curry that morning. He just took up the pot of rotten fish curry and poured it into the pot of pork curry. Got the ladle and stirred it all up together, saying, "It's all the same. It's all the same." And I thought, if it's all the same, why do you take yours first? And I was so upset and angry at his behavior. But then I realized almost immediately, enlightened beings don't get upset at what other people do. They don't mind what they eat, enlightened beings. And I realized, oh my goodness, I'm not enlightened after all. And at that was one of the most depressing mornings I've ever had. When you think you're enlightened and you find out you're not. And anyway, I took the mixture of pork and rotten fish and put it in I didn't mind what I ate now. But not because I was enlightened, because I was depressed. But it really showed me just how, if you want to know what enlightenment is, or if someone else is enlightened, give them some really terrible curry to eat. And see if they can stomach it. See what they do. So anyway, an enlightened person is you don't have any wishes anymore, no wants. You're perfectly content. And you know it. So that's how you can understand what enlightenment is. The ending of greed, hatred, and delusion. Not just greed. I mean, greed is just too intense. Wanting, ill will, and delusion. So anyway, so if anybody thinks they're enlightened, please come over here. And I'll tell you how stupid. Singaporeans can't get enlightened. So anyway, I was going to talk about something totally different this morning, but there it is, it's 9 o'clock, so I hope you enjoyed that. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Excellent. And please give me some feedback as well, whether you are enjoying the sutta classes or whether we should transfer that to a guided meditation. Basically, yes, I'm a teacher, but I'm also like serving you. That's a job when you teach anybody, to find out just what the customers require and to do what I can do to be of service. So let me know. You can let Sarai Ling know, and then she will let me know. Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay. So now we have the interviews, and that's be followed by lunch.